Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, live show number 550. Nice little chronological tick over kind of thing. I'm your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining. Um, it's going to be an interesting day. There we go. Okay. I was afraid that we lost our connection for just a second. My apologies for pausing in the middle of the show. All right. Show today. Yes. Oh, sorry about that. We are making sure that we are connected. There we go. All right. Thanks so much for joining. Sorry for the hiccups. Like sometimes all of a sudden bandwidth went to zero and it says not broadcasting. It's like, oh my goodness, there's a technical issue, which has been known to happen from time to time. Thanks so much for joining us. Middle of February 2026. We're well into the first quarter. Lots of fun dialogue going on as to the expectations of this year and how we've been moving through so far. There's been some surprise success in January for a lot of markets in comparison to the unknowns that were going to be happening as we rolled into this year. And then, of course, then there is always markets that are in contrast to that have been following below the line that they were hoping for. It really depends on the market segment that you're servicing to. We are very much into a K economy right now. And as such, those that have the money and we are the product that those people like spending money on, our business is doing fine and in some ways better. For those that play to the margin or play to the people that are looking for more equitable deals or lower costing and so forth, they're finding it more challenging because in some ways the market, there is not as much ability for people to purchase because of the financial inconsistencies that are going on. They're in the middle of that K value, the high end value on a chart of people with money are doing whatever they want to do. And then this is that value of income goes down. So too, it goes down the ability for disposable income or discretionary income spends like travel. And so the choices become harder as to the ability to travel. And that's what we're kind of seeing strata right now within the inventory segmentations that we have, the luxury and upper middle and so forth. So we have been in the past couple of shows talking a lot about calculations of revenue, determining perspectives of where you are with revenue, what you can do to define your revenue, and how best to look at the measurabilities. And we're continuing that today. Our topic today is kind of a catch-all of some of the acronyms. And let's first say the topic, then we'll get into the variances. The topic today is PAR, POR, PAM, GO. Revenue by any other name. We are very similar to the military when it comes to acronyms, the abbreviations of a long string of words into a hodgepodge to reflect what the first letter of each may mean in the sense of a word that we now can use to define them, like RevPAR, revenue per available room. We're very familiar with that term. I want to bring to question or bring into mind the perspective that it's still a problem in our industry, albeit not as much of a problem because of the forced aggregation of marketing and revenue management more so now than ever. But years ago, we used to talk about the siloed segmentation between revenue management's optimization and operations and marketing's measurement and operations, and how they worked in parallel, sometimes divergent, but didn't refer in the same ways that made sense to each. So we talked about this collaborative ability for revenue management to work with marketing to better yield the opportunities that revenue management were looking for with the tools that marketing had available. And by the same token, marketing's awareness of what revenue goals were as KPIs so they could measure their efforts towards those KPIs. Best key example is gross revenue as a KPI. If the revenue manager is hitting a certain revenue, gross top line revenue goal for that month, then that number needs to be very present in the mind of the marketers as they create and use the initiations of their marketing campaigns to know that even though they may have in their metrics a great success with ad campaigns, a good ROAS, return on ad spend, it in effect didn't really truly strongly contribute to the KPI that's needed, which is the gross revenue total that revenue management is shooting for. So I could have a ROAS as an example of 25 to 1, something, wow, this is so great. For every dollar spent, I made $25 in metrics associated with that ad campaign. Unfortunately, the total revenue of that was just a fraction of what was needed for the total KPI revenue for that month. Now, if it's part of a larger puzzle and it was contributing to it, that's one thing. But if that was the lead key thing, then it fell short of the mark because it was far less than what was truly needed. That being said, we have gotten better in the collaboration between the departments, but we still, I feel, have a rift as to how we understand what we're doing in ways that benefit the actionable value of both revenue management and marketing. Because now you're beginning to mix in ownership or management teams, management organizations, operating management team operations for multiple properties and so forth, their interpretation of what the property is producing. And in our world of trying to always make numbers that make sense, and also probably more importantly, make numbers that make us look like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we have a vast variety of acronyms that are trying to find ways to better understand how the money that's being made, that dollar amount, those numbers, equate to the investment or the inventory availability of the product itself. And that's where we get into the RevPAR, and we'll talk about POR and PAM and so forth. So RevPAR, one of the oldies and goldies, and one that has been more persistent throughout the course and arc of hospitality and hotels more specifically, is revenue per available room. In simple math terms, that's the total revenue divided by the total number of available rooms. You have 100 rooms, you look at your revenue, you divide it by 100, that's your RevPAR. That has been a mainstay measuring stick of how your hotel is doing in contrast to other hotels that also measure their RevPAR. It's a part of how we were using STARS, Smith Travel Research, reporting back in the day when we were being able to compare ourselves to our comp set that we defined and said, how are we in comparison to them? RevPAR was a huge measuring stick that ownership, management teams, the property used to see how well they were doing. Think of it as an RPM gauge in that sense. And it was also in contrast to other acronyms like OCC, which is occupancy, okay, which is how many of our rooms did we fill? ADR, average daily rate, how much were we charging per room? LOS, length of stay, how long were they staying when they checked in? And that was measured against all of our competitors. That was in our comp set, competitive set, that gave us some measurability of whether we were getting our market fair share. Think of it as if you were to take all of your hotels, your comp set hotels in your inventory together, that gives you one number. This is the total room count that we have. So if there was 5 hotels, each were 100 rooms, and you were 20% of your market comp. So anything less than maintaining that percentage in relationship to the total inventory was you weren't getting your fair share, meaning that you weren't yielding as much business as you should be getting for the amount of inventory you have in comparison to your competitors who were in fact stealing your market share. And that's also a measuring bar that goes back and forth as to how well you are performing against your comp set. If you were getting more than your fair share percentage, then you were stealing somebody else's market share. And these were measuring sticks, famously tab 4 in the STAR reports that you received, to see how well you did. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. And we're focusing on revenue terms right now for a very strong reason, because we're going to draw marketing's conversation back into this. There are revenue terms that are used to be helpful for revenue managers to understand their pace, their trend, their penetration, like RevPAR. And then you start getting into other acronyms that are more, I wouldn't say holistic, but that seems the better way of using it, inclusive as to the total revenue opportunity that the property has. And this goes into, well, how do you account for all the rooms, not just the rooms that you're selling? How do you account for your common area space that are your spaces that you can sell, your banquet and your common space that you can sell? How much you generate revenue in relationship to them in addition to what you're doing for rooms? What about your restaurants? How well are they operating in the conglomeration of revenue generation? All your ancillary, maybe you have retail outlets, maybe you have spa, again, golf and things like this. How do they contribute, and to how much do they contribute to each other? Like just staying at your hotel, how much of the revenue how much revenue does golf make off of the people that stay at your hotel versus outside sources that come in to play golf? How well does your restaurant perform internally as well as externally? How much percentages are related to each of the contributions of this? So you begin to see the fragmentation that begins to go on how you assign value. Now, going up the food chain, management teams, management companies, look at this as a measuring stick that they can answer to ownership as to how well they're yielding the asset they're responsible for. How well do they sell their meeting space? How well do they sell just the rooms? And how well do the restaurants run profitably? And they need measurements that can show that. That's where we're getting into these terms. So when you're looking at profitability of organizations, common spaces, you can look at, I'm just going to pick a few out of the hat that I have on a list so I remember all the acronyms I want to talk about today. You have ProPast, which is profits per available space time. ProPost, profits per occupied space time. So you have one that's inclusively of everything. And then how much are you yielding from that, what you're selling? Take that as a point of saying, if I have an empty ballroom, 50% of my ballroom is empty, and I sold half of it, my ProPast is going to be 50% less of my maximum capacity, just for round numbers, compared to my ProPost, which is I'm only accounting for how much revenue I made off of the part that actually sold. So my yieldability, say it's 1,000 square feet. In my ProPast, I sold 500 square foot, so my ProPast number against the whole 1,000 is 50% value. My ProPost, I sold the total amount for the 500 square foot that I did sell was a certain number in relationship to what was sold for that event based on only the 500 square foot, which is a really small room when you think about it. Anyways, I digress. The idea being that how you want to measure is either on the announcement of the revenue as it relationships to the source of it, or the yielding, which is the key difference between the two, the yielding of what you did sell. And that's what goes pretty much hand in hand when you start talking about RevPAR versus RevPOR versus TRevPAR, GoPAR. And we'll go through these. And I'm just going to read this. It's like, welcome to Acronym Hour. We'll go through some of these so you have a sense. A lot of these, to be honest, I don't use very often. They're more used in the revenue management space as a reference to whatever is of direct interest of their ownership. Each ownership, I find, is different as to what number they assign to how they measure how well the management company or the operating team of the hotel are performing. And each one has their preference. Ownership organizations have their standards. They have certain numbers that they like as a measuring stick because that's what they use and refer to internally, or for investment purposes, for selling out for other people to invest with them. So you have terms that are more operationally usage as to performance and pace. And then you have other terms that are more reflective of overall value that is what the asset is producing. So let's start simple. I mentioned a few. ADR, average daily rate. This is what you're charging per room, aggregated over all the variations. And we know that some rooms are a certain rate, other rooms at inventory types are at other rates. The ADR is cumulative to all of that. That being said, you also have the fragmentation below it that my ADR for doubles versus kings versus suites all have their own measurability too. So this is just an average daily rate of all of that collectively. What am I selling my rooms on average, not mean, for that day? OCC is occupancy, and that is literally how many rooms did I sell compared to all the rooms that I have. Length of stay, simple math, is how long are the stays for there. They check in on a certain date. How long do they stay before they leave? Depending upon the type of inventory you have, that can range anywhere from 2.5 days to 5, 7 days, 14 days. Length of stay is a variable according to the inventory type that you offer. You use those three to determine transaction value, which is what did they pay, ADR, how long did they stay, length of stay, okay? And then you calculate occupancy and you have your revenue associated with the transaction value that you're generating from each reservation that you make. So, and that goes back to nights versus stays, but that's a tangent down to a little bit more granular than we want to hit today. These are reporting acronyms more than they are the using metrics. So RevPAR, we've already hit it. Revenue per available room, total revenue divided by the total number of available rooms. Rev poor, revenue per occupied room. How much money did we make off of the rooms we sold? Not all the rooms, including the empty ones, just the ones we sold, which is total revenue. Okay. Plus other departments. How much revenue did all the people staying with us generate for us? Okay. That is different than RevPAR, which is only accounting for this is our total room inventory. This is what we sold off of it, and the revenue is applied to the total inventory. RevPOR is we're only going to look at the rooms we sold and all the money that we made from them. So total revenue, which includes other departments, divided by the number of actual occupied rooms. TRevPAR or TRevPAR, total revenue per available room. This goes back to looking at now the entire inventory. Total revenue, including all the food and beverage and all the ancillary revenues, divided by the total available rooms. So you see where RevPAR was about all the rooms, regardless if they were occupied or not. TRevPAR is associated the same way as RevPOR, only in the sense that now they're including all of the values that they got from everything that they sold, but applied to the entire inventory. Okay. And you're wondering, if you're not in the revenue management space, what's the difference? They're used for different purposes. And you know what? We probably could do other shows that highlight some of the usabilities of these. And we probably will pop up on some of the podcasting conversations with that, taking one out of the hat like a TRevPAR and say, how do you use this number? Why is this number different? Or why would you want to use it in difference to a RevPAR or RevPOR? And there is value assessment to it because you look at contribution values. Are your restaurants really, as a cost of asset, providing the revenue enhancement that they should be, or are they a drain on the value proposition of the hotel because it's not selling, which then allows you to reflect upon, is the restaurant concept correct? Is the pricing in the restaurant correct? Is the marketing for the restaurant correct? You know, if you're operating in the red on your restaurant persistently, you're bleeding off the revenues of other departments to sustain them because the restaurant's open as an amenity to them. That's where these kind of cumulative costs of values, okay, come into use, is determining what value proposition these amenities have. And the larger the scale your operations, you start dealing with booths, like coffee booths or retail outlets and so forth, you begin to decide, is this really a value to our guests? Are we really selling enough through it? Versus the introspection, is there something we can do about the low production of it? And if you really look at it as just no longer a desired amenity, then what else can you do with that space, if anything, to stop the cost loss that it's producing? That's where these larger scope value propositions like TRevPAR come into play. How much is everything contributing to the overall revenue of everything we're selling? To continue on, GOPAR, GOPPAR, gross operating profit per available room. This is gross operating profits provided the available rooms, focusing on the profitability of the rooms that are being sold, not of all of the rooms that you have. This is a reflection of RevPAR. This is saying, what's our yieldability of the inventory we still have to sell? If I've sold half of my hotel, what value is the rest of the half? Am I having to reduce the rate? Can I increase the rate? Is it inventory specific as to what I can sell better rate for? Do I have to sell lower rate because I can't sell it because of the demand to market? Your GOPAR, gross operating profit per available room, is adjusting for that. It's letting you help define what the value of your remaining asset availability is. That's a harder one to work with because you're looking at that as a pace stick when you're looking at revenue yield. If you're closer to it, you're yielding out better your sellability of the inventory you have to sell. If your GOPAR is so far out, you're not able to sell up to it. You see yourself as deficient to the market, and that's when you have to start looking at your competitive set. How are they looking when it comes to their sellability, at what rates, and you can estimate their GOPAR to know whether or not you're ahead or behind them. So it's a performance metric more so than an accountability reporting metric. Then you have things like RevPAS, revenue per available space per square foot. This goes back to all the other things that hotels have other than just rooms, where function space, event revenue, it's literally, here's my total square footage that I can sell. What is the revenue divided by that I'm yielding? So if I go back to, let's make a bigger number that's more realistic, 10,000 square foot, and that seems still small. How much money is attributed to the banquet sales of those rooms, the room rental and so forth, How much is that translated into to per square foot? And that's a measurement. You have a baseline of what you have historically, you have a baseline of expected revenue performance from it, and you see where you're landing between those two. If last year your RIF was $10 a foot, and for this time last year, and you're sitting at $6 a foot, either you've lower priced yourself or the demand volume is lower, so you can't yield it as much because you're not selling as much. If by the same token, though, your budget calculations was to say that you're supposed to do $12 a square foot, then you are by far behind, unless you figure you're going to make it up in other areas, and this is just one of the lull periods that you're going to arc below it. Then you know that you have to pick up some sort of pace. There's a focus to it. That's more of a performance function. Now you're saying, wow, we're pacing, or we're not placing where we need to be for what we expected this to yield out as. Is that because of new competition in the market, lack of demand, a whole host of things? But it allows a prescriptive evaluation of understanding, or diagnostic evaluation, not prescriptive, diagnostic evaluation as to what you need to focus on. Like, we really need to yield our common space, our available space, better. There's another one, ARPA, average revenue per account. This is average revenue generated per account, often used in more corporate segments. This is a yieldability of client relationships. This one tends to be more more uniquely towards the sales revenue management conversation. How well are our relationships yielding according to historical values that they represent? If you have a negotiated rate with a local business that's present in local business, an LNR, local negotiated rate, you may say that they represented this much revenue for a period of time. Usually annually is how you first look at it. And you see how they're pacing towards that. This is often used. I used to use it more towards wholesalers. Yieldable value to wholesalers. Wholesalers will promise you the world of what they will sell in order to get a lower rate that they can offer to those that they sell to. And they want, of course, the lower rate during your highest demand times, and that you usually leave reserved because you could sell it better at a higher rate. You don't want to give up a lower rate when you know you can sell. But they want it so they can have a better chance to sell. So they offer you a larger volume of overall bookings, saying, look, if you give me the lower rate during spring break, I promise 10,000 room nights in summer and fall, when you really do need them, more so than you do during your peak rate. And because that's going to give you better business when it's harder for you to find business, you might acquiesce some inventory at a lower rate to them during your peak demand so that you can get that negotiated value relationship. ARPA is usually used during that. I used to use that during that. It's like, okay, so how are they pacing? They promised we were supposed to have 5,000 room nights by March 1st. Here it is, middle of February, and they've only done 3,000. In the contract, if you haven't hit the 5,000 mark by February 28th, that rate I offered you or the inventory I offered you for March is null. Sad part is, if you didn't catch it too soon, they've already sold out their high yield opportunities, and you can't take it back from them. There's a way around it, but anyways, it all goes into the contract and how you negotiate the leverage value that they would still have to pay. But the idea being, this is where ARPA comes in, that you tend to use it a little bit more often than that. Some of the more I'm trying to think of some of the smaller ones. Operational inventory revenue. I already talked about BAR. We have a very familiar term in hospitality. Best available rate. This is the lowest non-restricted rate available to the general public. What does non-restricted rate mean? It means that it's conditionally, I don't have to have an AARP card, AAA card, corporate ID, some prepay, okay, in the sense that non-refundable. Those are all restrictions. And a BAR is really, what is my best available rate out of all the rates that I'm asking for all the inventory types that I have for any given day? What is my best available rate? And that's whatever the one at best of it is out of that category. Last room value, the maximum revenue expected from the final available room. This is a marker value. Last room value is sometimes, first off, it's a moving number. You don't assign the number, you target the number. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. Back when I had hotels in the Florida Keys, we had a massive walk-in rate. We could be half our hotel was reserved for that evening, and most places would be like, "Oh my God, we're only 50% or 48%." By the end of the night, we were sold out, and that was because there was a massive amount of walk-in market, drive-in market, really, because they're coming down A1A and they think, they come by the hotel and so forth. So I would work with my team, my front desk team, as to what rates were available for them to offer people that came to the front desk asking what our rates were to check in. They didn't make a reservation. They're literally walking in and asking, and if it hits them right, then they're going to make a reservation. And I would break it down according to our target. First, I would look at the total revenue that we're shooting for, our ADR that we were shooting for. And then I would look at our remaining inventory, and I would break it down as to how much of that inventory, based on the inventory type I still had to sell, I could sell them for. And the tiered structure, what's the lowest rate I could get? What's a moderate rate that I would want? And what's the highest rate that I would really want to get from that, the highest yieldable rate to it? And I would have numbers of inventory assigned to it. Like you could sell only 4 lowest rate values. You could sell 8 mid-rate values, and you could sell 4 high-rate values. So if you sell 4, you can sell more lower. Okay, if you sell 5 high-rate values, you have more low rate, because it's really easy to sell low-rate rooms. Obviously, somebody walks in and is surprised by how much of a low rate you quote them, they'll book in comparison with something else that they, stop by another hotel and get another rate from. So I gave them this variation to this, and this creates what's called last room value, or can create what's called last room value. And that is, you look at, if my last room is to be sold, what could I get for it? And that really comes to the question of compression. If you have too many rooms yet to sell, my last room value is low because I'm not going to get there. So my last room that I get to sell is really going to be a low rated room because nobody's willing to pay higher than what I finally convinced them to purchase at low rate. However, if I have good compression, and compression means that you have fewer rooms to sell, you're compressing the demand that is in market to now yield a higher rate for your room. So last room value is a marker that says, wow, with what I have left to sell, based on how I want to try to sell it, my anticipated last room value is X. It's like a micro ADR, average daily rate. Out of what I have left to sell for what I can sell them for, this is where I want it to land. And that's that marker that you're shooting for. Either you land on it, above it, or below it. Okay. Other ones, GR, gross room revenue, total revenue generated solely from room bookings. And that kind of goes back hand in hand to the TRevPAR, into the sense of overall value proposition of that, what you booked for everything that they're doing within your property. Cost per occupied room, very high usage function here. Total cost associated with renting a room. This is your margin of operations for your rooms. Each room has its cost. The larger the room, the higher the cost. And I say that not because it's, fixed costs, air conditioning costs more money in larger rooms and so forth, but the real cost, and fixtures and features, more furniture, more things. It's more about the cost of maintaining it. How much time the housekeeping team has to spend in that room to bring it up to clean and available. Multiple beds, multiple places to clean, kitchenettes, not kitchenettes, refrigerators, not refrigerators, amenities, not amenities. All of those take time. And the cost per available room, or occupied room, is usually associated with the value or the cost it takes to maintain that. The occupied room, if it takes 30 minutes for a housekeeping team to clean the room, 45 minutes to clean the housekeeping room, that's a variable of the labor cost. If it's amenity based, and every room has amenities in it, there's cost of the amenities that you're placing into the soaps, the giveaways, and things like this that you use, the toiletries and so forth, or other amenities that you put in the room. Those are all costs related to the occupied room. Cost when it comes to your fixed overheads, the air conditioning, the maintenance of the repairs of bumped furniture and the torn pictures and the doors that don't work correctly, whatever it is. All those things get aggregated together to how much does it cost to maintain that room. And then that's aggregated to all the rooms. And then that's divided into the cost associated with it, as to saying that our room here costs $44 or $45 to turn over, meaning that's including the labor and the amenities and everything else. It costs us $44 to change that room to a clean and ready room for the next sale. Of course, the stay over goes less. Stay over is just a touch up, bringing in certain amenities at most. And that's even become reduced down even farther these days after COVID, so that there's less of a cost to it. All that goes towards the cost of occupied rooms. So if you have certain occupancy in your rooms and you look at your total rooms as to new arrivals versus stayovers, that can get calculated that this is our total cost per occupied room. How are we doing in yieldability against the revenue that we're getting for it compared to the cost of actually operating with those occupied rooms? Gives you a sense of that. Okay, we already talked about ProPass, ProPost. Just to touch on it again, it's common space areas. You're trying to calculate the value of the square footage you have available to the revenue yield that you have. You either include everything, regardless of whether you sold it, or you only reflect upon the parts that you have sold and how much you yielded for that. But as you can see, like I said, with the topic today of PAR, POR, Pay 'em, Go, they all have their value propositions as to what they're trying to show you. Some are more reflective of ownership or management teams, understanding how well they're operating and how much they're getting from the operations. Others can be a measurement of performance success, revenue managers to know whether or not that they're getting the right rates for what they're costing. Obviously, if you're charging a rate that is too close to your cost per occupied room, your CPOR, then you know that you have issues, because that leaves less money to apply to everything else that goes into operating the hotel, because it's just not the housekeeping team cost on that room. It's the front desk team, it's the engineering team, it's the accounting and HR and operations team and general manager and whoever else. There has to be monies, gross revenues that come in that cover all the costs associated with that building, which is why you have a lot of these markers for ownership to understand how everything is being accounted for against everything that can be sold. And that's where most of those values come in. The more specific ones about performances, like the RevPARs and so forth, are about performance within what's being sold. How well are we yielding, or how well are we attaining our revenue for what we're selling operationally? What's our pacing comparison to our comp set? How's our occupancy? How much are we yielding for the rooms we are selling? How much is the value of the rooms that we have yet to sell? These are ways that we can measure our pace and performance. Bringing marketing back into this very quickly is to point out the fact that these often don't get discussed with marketing in the way that they're used. Marketing still is, in spite of the efforts so far to date of driving revenue managers and marketers together, don't often understand how these acronymic measurements get used well and how they relate to them. If they understood better the yieldability, because for them, they see only the cost of what they do for the results that they make. Taking case of acronym for marketing, which is ROAS, ROAS, which is revenue. My mind just went blank. Oh, that's so scary. Return on ad spend. Oh my gosh. Dink. But for marketers, that's a benchmark number. How well are we performing for the money we're spending, for the money we're yielding? The part that doesn't get translated well from the marketing arm of that is they may feel that they can get down to a very low ROAS and still be doing good when they've actually went below the red line and is costing the operation more money for what's being produced from that marketing campaign than it is not to have done it, because they're spending so close to what it costs of the money that they're making from it, the return. Okay, if I get down to a 4-to-1, that means I'm spending, for every dollar I'm spending, I'm getting $4 back, and the marketer may feel that that's still justifiable value. But in all honesty, they went far above the cost margin that they can, because now that 75% return or the 25% cost isn't enough to cover the 90% cost that's associated with the money being generated. Already we know that the dollar spend to get that yield is 25% of the cost of doing it. So that's only left 75 cents on the dollar, but you need 90 cents on the dollar to operate marginally. So you've lost 15 cents on a dollar for that campaign. You're costing more money for the dollars you're generating than it's worth paying the money for. Without that collaboration of communication between marketing and revenue management, understanding some of these acronymic terms as to how the overall measurements are made, they don't understand that that's not a good thing, that they need to stop it at 6-to-1 or 7-to-1 or whatever the yieldability contribution that is, so that they don't marginalize themselves into a negative cost to the property for doing marketing. They only see their cost relationships. They need to understand the cost relationships of everything. And that's where these acronymic terms come in. It's not just a RevPAR discussion. It's about RevPOR. It's about TRevPAR. It's about understanding all of our inventory needs to be sold. This is what the value is to it based on what we're currently doing. These are the markers of how well we're doing it for. Anything below these lines are troublesome. Temporarily, they can be maintained, but sustained, they turn into the draw that closes businesses. They can't make enough money. You see hotels and say, "Oh, I always thought they were decently busy," but really, in all honesty, the business they were getting was costing them more than their ability to maintain operating the business that they had. So that's where these terms, as divergent as they are, truly are helpful. And again, they're really thrown into two bin categories when it comes to overall: those that assign total inventory perspective, and those that assign specific production of the inventory that's sold. From there, you begin to use them in their individualities. Knowing these better from a marketing perspective, not just from what they are, but how they're used in your organization, is a key first step. Ask the questions if you're a marketer. How do we measure these things? What's the terms and what's the vernaculars of what ownership asks about? How do you use these? Which ones do you use as a revenue manager? How can you better tell me how we're doing with these terms now that I understand how they're calculated, so that I can base that against my marketing efforts to know when good is good and bad is bad, and not go into the bad. These are the collaboration values that acronyms like this have. So, topic: PAR, POR, PAM, GO. Revenue by any other name is really just a measurement of how we're performing in the terms that are most understandable to the departments or ownerships need and use of them. So, with that, excuse me, got tickled in my throat now. Thank you so much for attending the show. For always those that watch us live in the most strangest of time zones out of the 209 countries we're in, thank you. For those that listen to our recast, at 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time, 11:30 a.m. Wednesday, London time. And for our EU and Mideast friends, thank you so much for that. Thank you for the questions that come back and the feedback and so forth. Should you ever want to have a question, feedback, or contribution to the show, you can reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. And I answer each and every email related to both the show, the podcast, and our radio station and the TV channel. Of course, with that in mind, we do have the TV channel and app. You can look for Hospitality Channel on your smart TV. I'm not going to list off all the smart variations, but we're on Apple, Amazon, Google, so forth and so on. If you want to listen to our radio station, hospitalityradio.com. It's a linear feed that has all the varieties of all the departments of our hospitality industry in there, different podcasts from a variety of places. We're constantly changing it up to people and resources as to what they say about our industry. You can catch us at hospitalityradio.com. If you're looking for our app, which is our TV channel, you can catch us on Apple iOS, at the Apple Store, or at Google Play. Just look for Hospitality Channel. The show is always on the free side of that. There's a pay gateway for the TV channel. If you want to get more additional information and data that's industry specific, you can join that. If you are a hospitality marketer, wish to join a peer level group where you rather than talking to people that don't understand what you do and you have to explain everything all the time, but talk to people that know what you're doing because they're doing it too, and you get a nice ability to bounce ideas back and forth. It's a wonderful form to be in. Go to hospitalitymarketing.club, just put your email in, send you a quiz to validate that you are indeed a hospitality marketer, that you're doing this, and then you can join into, we send you the credentials to join. It's not on Facebook or anything like this. This is a private community entity. And that's where a lot of these ideas come from, about discussions such as this. If you want to talk back audibly, you can go to hdm.news/talkback and give me your mind, or you can answer the question I always put up every week from there. And of course, we simulcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. So you can catch us. And thank you all again for all the associations that broadcast us live, as also all of the corporate relationships we have that broadcast us live on their different channels on YouTube or pages on Facebook. So with that, my name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time and look forward to talking to you all next week.